Welcome to the March-April 2017 Champion Briefs Institute Supplemental Video Analysis for Lincoln-Douglas Debate. Today we'll be talking about counterplans in the context of the resolution, the United States ought to guarantee the right to housing. If you'd like a more generic overview of the topic, Champion Briefs Institute has already published a video I produced on YouTube, so give that one a look if you want a more generic analysis. But this video is going to be pretty short, and it's going to go through a little bit of an overview on counterplans, what you need to know to run a counterplan, and then we'll look specifically at the living wage counterplan from the Champion Briefs 2017 files that we produced. So without further ado, let's look at the counterplan overview. So there's a lot of different kinds of counterplans you can run or will run into over the course of your debate career. Some a lot better than others. So for your generic ones, you've got things like consult counterplans, where the negative proposes that the affirmative should instead consult an external actor before doing the 1AC. That could be something like the Joint Chiefs, Native Councils, right? Whoever generates some interesting offense for the negative. The next type of counterplan you'll run into are delay counterplans, where instead of just doing the plan immediately, you'll wait some time frame, usually to avoid a politics disad. You'll also run into agent counterplans where the negative will propose a different actor do the 1AC. That could be the states, the United Nations, whoever, right? You'll also run into advantage counterplans, just generic random counterplans meant to solve a specific advantage. But I think the best type of counterplans in general are those that are extremely specific to the affirmative. That means they're both textually and functionally competitive, and it also means that they outweigh the affirmative and attempt to solve the problem area of the affirmative, right? So there's a lot going on there, but we'll go through a little bit more of the specifics of a counterplan now, right? So when you're reading a counterplan, or writing one for that matter, there's three main things you really want to think about. You want to think about solvency / impacts, right? How the counterplan deals with the affirmative, right? How it outweighs it or solves it in some way. You'll want to think about why it's mutually exclusive. That's actually the most important part. It's kind of like a link on a disadvantage, right? You need to prove why the counterplan is an opportunity cost to doing the 1AC in order for it to be a theoretically legitimate position. And then the last thing you'll really need to be aware of is all the theoretical objections that an affirmative could have. I'm going to list those really quick, but if you really want to learn about all of the different theoretical objections that an affirmative might have to a counterplan, I would encourage you to just Google a backfile, a theory backfile somewhere, or ask a coach or a friend, or email me, right? I'll send you, there's countless theory backfiles you can just Google and find. Go to the counterplan theory section and really read up and memorize all these different counterplan shells, because I just don't have the time to go through each of them here, but I'll list off a couple for you. You'll want to deal with conditionality bad, dispositionality bad, picks bad, consults bad, delay bad, agent CPs bad, topical CPs bad, multi-actor fiat bad, object fiat bad, textual competition good, and solvency advocate. That's not really an exhaustive list, but those are the pretty much basic counterplan theory shells that an affirmative will run. And so when you're crafting your counterplan, you really want to try to preempt a lot of those arguments and really avoid a lot of them. Also, as a negative reading a counterplan, you're going to have to answer a lot of permutations, right? The best way to do that is to create an affirmative, or a counterplan rather, that just is mutually exclusive with the 1AC. But there's a lot of ways that the affirmative can abuse the negative in this instance to try to sort of get out of this claim, right? That can include something like intrinsic perms, right? Where the affirmative adds an extra element outside of the counterplan and the affirmative to make that permutation work, right? To make them no longer mutually exclusive. Or a severance perm, right? Where the affirmative severs out of some of its plan text to make the two operate together, right? Affirmatives will deploy multiple perms, right? Sometimes they won't have a perm text. Sometimes these permutations will include delay mechanisms from the affirmative, right? But as the negative, it's really important that you're really familiar with all the theoretical objections to these different types of permutations and the theoretical objections that are in the affirmative's toolkit to answer your position. So far we've gone over counterplans, right? There's three main areas you want to focus on when constructing your counterplan: your solvency and your impacts, your mutual exclusivity claims, and any theoretical objections that the affirmative might have. So once you've prepared these types of things, right, you're ready to run a counterplan. So what would that look like on this topic? Well, ideally, right, it would be specific to an affirmative, but I'm not going to go over a very specific counterplan today. I'm going to go over a generic one that could be sort of your go-to strategy against a lot of different affirmatives, right? Because you'll certainly have your counterplans that are constructed in the context of one negative constructive, right? They're built to beat one team, one type of argument, right? One type of affirmative. But you'll also want generic counterplans for when an affirmative breaks new, right? Whether that's in an outrun or even just the first round of a tournament, right? And so focusing on crafting a generic counterplan that is mutually exclusive with the topic per se is a really good mechanism of having some guaranteed negative ground available to you. So living wage counterplan, right? The first thing that you want to do when you're crafting a counterplan is make sure that you have an advocate. Just like the affirmative, you want to make sure that you're avoiding a lot of these really basic issues right off the gate. To do that, have somebody that provides scholarly evidence as to why your proposal is a good idea. You'll also want to make sure that you're proving that it's mutually exclusive. So in the Champion Briefs Institute files this month, we've provided a living wage counterplan, right? Instead of modifying our housing policies in some way or putting money into our housing policies in some way, we should instead take a step back and provide every individual a living wage instead of targeting specific things that they need to spend money on, right? Now, that might not really strike you as mutually exclusive, but we've got a lot of good evidence to prove that it is. You could make arguments about how you would use the same money as the affirmative. You could have a bunch of evidence that proves that welfare spending within a Republican government is zero sum. You could have evidence about how housing policies are generally extremely biopolitical, and it's better to just trust individuals with the money. You could make housing-specific disadvantages and then use the counterplan to solve the impacts of the 1AC while avoiding the disadvantage, right? You could have evidence about how incremental reforms outside of a democratic socialist project fail. You could have arguments about how the agent of change within housing policies is uniquely problematic, right? There's a lot of arguments you can make as to why a living wage counterplan or living wage policy couldn't happen at the same time as, for example, a housing first policy, right? They're ideologically contradictory, right? But the important part here is when you're crafting this counterplan, right, you want to make sure that you've got your solvency advocate that says that the counterplan is a good idea and answers some arguments ideally, but you'll also want to make sure that you've created a robust mutual exclusivity claim out of your negative constructive. Now, there's a little bit of a debate that happens throughout policy circles about when mutual exclusivity should be created. And in policy debate, where you have a lot more speeches, it's not necessarily as important. But in Lincoln-Douglas debate, where you've got two speeches as the entirety of your negative strategy, I generally find, especially given the short 1AR, I find it pretty persuasive to put that mutual exclusivity claim in the NC to force that already extremely time-constrained AR to deal with it then, right? Because if they just make a permutation in their AR and move on, right, they're not really going to be getting any leverage against the wall of arguments that you made in your negative constructive, right? So generally, I would put those mutual exclusivity claims there. If y'all are interested, we have cards in our files already about this discussion, but Howard Reed and Stuart Lansley actually produced a book called Universal Basic Income, An Idea Whose Time Has Come. And it is in the context of the United Kingdom, but the reason I really like this book for this kind of counterplan, A, is because it's really new, but also B, the reason I like it is it provides a summary of all the arguments on both sides for and against the living wage and responds to them with empiric evidence as to how it can work, right? So if you're really looking for supplemental evidence for this type of counterplan, Howard Reed and Stuart Lansley wrote a great book on it. But other than that, our files are extremely complete on this question. We've got a lot of cards talking about how the zero-sum nature of welfare spending, right? And that's a really great starting place for building a sort of counterplan, right? So, in summation, Most important part of a counterplan is your mutual exclusivity claim. You want to make sure, though, that you've got really good solvency arguments about how you deal with the problem area of the affirmative, and you have a theoretically sound counterplan. That means your counterplan text is written. It's typed out, right? It's not just something you made up on the fly. That means you have a solvency advocate, right? That means you're not just consulting or delaying, right? Like, you're doing something that is genuinely mutually exclusive with the affirmative topic area and outweighs and is theoretically legitimate. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I'm always really interested to hear how y'all feel about these videos. So please, anything you have to say, drop it in the comments and I'll try my best to respond. Thank y'all for paying attention to this video. Have a great day.